Hello, I'm Anthony Mills, Executive Director of Global Innovation Institute. GINI is the world's leading certification, accreditation, and membership organization in the world of innovation. Today, we're here to talk about a new book published by GINI, The Other Side of Growth. The Other Side of Growth, An Innovator's Responsibilities in an Emerging World, is a book that brings together 9 thought leaders from around the world to talk about how innovation is used to drive corporate growth in an organization and how business leaders need to really think about the ways they use innovation and all of the stakeholders involved and who it impacts, and ask ourselves some challenging questions about the innovations we're launching and how we're using that to drive growth in our organization. With me today is Mr. Larry Schmitt. Larry is one of the co-founders and principals of the consulting firm, the Innovo Group in Ann Arbor, Michigan. The Innovo Group is one of the leading consulting firms in the U.S. In corporate innovation practices and processes. And Larry is an expert in corporate growth. And Larry has written a contribution to this book, a chapter called Purpose-Driven Innovation. So welcome today, Larry.
Thank you, Anthony. Nice to be here this morning.
Great. It's a pleasure to have you. And what I want to do, Larry, is dive into a bunch of questions about your chapter and really have you elaborate for us some of the details behind it.
Sure.
Okay.
Happy to do so.
Well, very good. So my first question today is, in our book, The Other Side of Growth, you introduce the concept of purpose-driven innovation. So talk to us in your own words about what that really means. What does it mean to be a purpose-driven innovator?
Well, for me, purpose-driven means that you have at top of mind the idea that the things that you are doing, things that you're introducing to the world, have real benefit to individuals, to societies, and everything in between. That they contribute to well-being, they contribute to the improvement of humanity. Okay, and that you think about those things as you are innovating and as you're introducing your innovations into the world. Now, purpose is a broad term. As a matter of fact, people could, as a matter of fact, Milton Friedman even did this, as the purpose of an organization is to make profits. So profit, is has always been one of the purposes of a corporation. But in this case, the use of the term purpose-driven innovation is meant to go beyond profits to things that are more beneficial to society as a whole.
Okay, very good. So it really expands our thinking more holistically to a broader purpose beyond just profits to other types of purposes.
Right, exactly.
Yes. And you alluded to this thing that you also set up in the book. You go on to set up this sort of tension between what you call the forces of profit and the forces of purpose. So tell us a bit more about that tension, what it looks like in real life.
Yeah, I think that tension really is one of the defining forces that is shaping the current discussion that people are having, around, the role and responsibility of corporations. Certainly, the profit motivation behind corporations has been, discussed, well documented. Many people have written about it. It's the force behind our capitalist architecture of the way we create value in society right now. But the tension that's emerging today is one that says it can't just be about profits. It has to be about more than profits. You have to think about what are the effects of the things that you're introducing to the world? What are the effects of your behavior as an enterprise? How is that benefiting things? And the tension comes about because people have traditionally said it's one or the other, right? And what we're really realizing now is it doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be both. And as a matter of fact, some people are advocating, and I probably would be in that camp, that being purpose-driven will eventually lead to greater profits down the road, all right, if you do it right. But the key in that phrase is eventually. We are so short-term focused in our society right now that it's hard to do the eventually part.
Yeah, and I think that from what I've, understand and seen, being purpose-driven forces us inherently to be more long-term focused. Would you agree?
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, it forces you to go beyond thinking what is going to happen immediately, when I introduce this into the market, to thinking longer term as, what are the long-term effects in this, and are there negative effects that I have to think about, that I should be thinking about now? And all
Absolutely.
too often, we don't think about the negative effects, as we're introducing these things.
Yeah.
And sometimes, even when we do think about the negative effects, we say, there's really nothing I can do about them right now. Let's just, push forward, and we'll deal with it when it happens, right?
Well, speaking of dealing with it, you actually introduce in your chapter these three spheres of influence and control: government, society, and business. So tell us how those three should ideally interact to realize purpose-driven innovation, and which they will interact eventually in dealing with it one way or the other.
Right, right. Yeah. I mean, if you think about it in that broad context, is, the enterprise, the business sphere, I mean, what they're doing is they're the forcing function that is causing changes in society, because businesses are coming up with new products, services, new artifacts, as I call them, introducing them with the intention of changing people's behavior, right? And those have an effect upon society, all the way from the individual level up to the level of the country, or even all of humanity. I mean, one would say Facebook has an influence over the entire human sphere throughout the world. So the social sphere that consists of the humanity part of it is reacting to these artifacts that are being introduced. And based upon the reaction, government is interceding or retreating appropriately. And you see it all playing out with Facebook right now, where
You did.
Facebook is introducing something, society's pushing back, government is reacting to society's reaction, and proposing new regulations. And all of this is a complex system that is
It's very complex, and ironically, you see where social media itself has been a tool that has enabled society to hold businesses more accountable. So there's been more transparency and accountability because of these tools, and yet some of the tools themselves are now being misused by, the wrongful actors.
right, exactly. And the rise of the social networks, and the ability to get a podcast and start speaking and get an audience, and to have big influence. I'm thinking of somebody like Kara Swisher, who has a huge audience and constantly rails against Facebook and companies like Robinhood and all of the things that they're doing, that have negative externalities, negative effects. And these are things that in turn cause a reaction from governments and other society actors, to push back on some of these things that these companies are doing, or have not even thought of.
And
Right.
I think increasingly we're seeing that in the EU, where the EU is being increasingly strict on a lot of the large tech companies like Facebook and Amazon.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right.
So absolutely, like you said, that's a very complex interaction between society, government, and business, and I think it will continue to be that way
Yeah,
indefinitely.
but also it's incumbent, in my opinion, upon the innovators coming up with these new ideas to think about this, right? To think about these complex interactions and how they may play out in the future.
To think about them up front,
Right. Think about them up
Sure.
front, because all too often they don't think about them, or if they do, they give up and say there's nothing we can do about them. So
Unfortunately. So in your chapter, you introduce what you call the enterprise perspective, and inside of that, you distinguish between enterprise behavior and artifact effects. So we think this is a very crucial distinction to be made between the two. So tell us more about this distinction and how those two things differ from each other.
right. Um, Enterprise behavior basically is how does the enterprise behave within their community, within their ecosystem? I mean, do they do good things? I mean, and you hear terms like triple bottom line and corporate social responsibility. You have many enterprises that give to their community, that do well by their stakeholders, including their employees. And these types of behaviors are widely acknowledged, and certainly beneficial. But the other side of the equation is what is happening to the things, that the artifacts, as I call them, that the company is introducing into the world. All right. Those are, in a sense, separate from the way the company behaves in its community and its ecosystem. Those have their own effects that could have negative consequences, negative externalities. So one of the examples I use is, a gun company who could be a excellent corporate citizen, give to charities, do corporate social responsibility, have a triple bottom line, all that stuff, but still make, semi-automatic rifles that they sell to, people in gun stores without much regulation.
Yeah.
How does that balance out? I mean, that's an extreme example, but those types of things happen.
Right. And in my experience, I see organizations, it seems to be, or it appears to be, that they try to use their enterprise behavior as a way to whitewash the artifacts they're selling. So, for example, a cigarette manufacturer could, manufacture and sell cigarettes that can have very harmful effects in society, and yet they may donate, billions of dollars to charity and hospitals and things. And so,
Right.
their enterprise behavior on one hand is attempting seemingly to compensate for the effect of the artifacts they sell.
Yeah, and that happens quite frequently. I mean, the rise of terms like greenwashing is indicative of that being a common practice.
Yeah, it is indeed. So that's something that I think society is also kind of wising up to as well, that
Right,
good enterprise behavior doesn't always make up for
right.
the negative effects of the
And the
artifact.
reason society is rising up is because the prevalence of people who are willing to call out these companies on social media, right, and to have an audience and a following, right. So that's changing the equation.
Excellent. So you also introduce us in your chapter to another concept, another sort of innovator's dilemma, if you will. And it's one where we have this loss of control and influence, or this blindness to the long-term future consequences. So if you would briefly explain to us these two dilemmas and tell us how innovators can address them, what is some sort of innovator solution, if you will?
Sure, sure. And I won't claim to have the solution, right? I think all of us are just starting out on this journey to try and figure out what a solution could be. So don't anticipate that this problem is a solved problem and I'm going to reveal the solution to you. But anyway, it's worth thinking about. Let me start with the second one first, which is the ability to foresee, possible consequences, to see beyond the point at which your innovation is launched into the world. A lot of times, what we see innovators within large corporations is their time frame. The focus of the time is going from idea to launch. All right, their sole focus is on how do I get this into the market and people start buying it and go up that hockey stick of growth curve, and they don't think much beyond that. Where is this going to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now? What are the possible, not just positive, but negative consequences? How could this, what I'm introducing now, evolve over time in many different ways? So one of the things we advocate for is for an innovator to broaden their time horizon, broaden their perspective in terms of how they think about what it is they're inventing or introducing into the market, how they think about that evolving over time. All right, so a broader time frame perspective. The loss of control is something that's probably inevitable in large corporations, because as you go from the initial idea to, say, minimally viable product to prototype, a beta, as you launch it into the marketplace, more people become involved with that. If it's going to turn into a business, then you get the operational excellence mind and muscles of the company start to get involved. You're not the only one making decisions about what you should do with the product. And it's inevitable that as this happens, except in very rare circumstances, that the innovator loses control over actually how the artifact, is marketed, is promoted, is used by its customers, those types of things. So the question before the innovator is how can you not necessarily maintain control, but maintain ongoing influence in how the company itself treats the new artifact that's being introduced? How can you help change the direction in a positive way, all right, to prevent some of the negative consequences? as you try to you lose control.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point. It's ultimately incumbent upon the entire organization to have the right mentality and perspective about how this new innovation is going to be used. And so what I'm seeing more and more young innovators do is really try to align themselves with organizations who they know will have this mentality, and they can continue to have the right influence. And even if they do lose control, they can trust that those who are in control have the right, mentality.
Yes, yes, and it's a two-way street. These young innovators looking for companies that have that sort of mindset, but also being able to have influence within the company and tell leadership, hey, this is the mindset you should have, and think about these things this way, and to have that perspective, to be able to communicate with the decision makers in the right way to say, hey, you should be thinking about this.
So yes, it sounds like organizations really need to keep those avenues of communication and influence open,
Right, right.
or that they stay on the right path with
Yeah.
innovation.
I mean,
Excellent.
I make the point in the book, in the chapter in the book, that it's virtually impossible to be a purpose-driven innovator inside a company that it's not itself purpose-driven, that does not have some sort of, societal benefit mission to it, right?
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah. So, and I totally agree. So then you go on to introduce us to a new tool in your chapter called the social model canvas. So if you would briefly explain to us what this canvas is and how innovators can use it.
sure, sure. And again, I want to caution, this is just, the early beginnings of thinking through some of this. And I, I wanted to build on the business model canvas that many, many companies use these days to actually look at their business models and, how to change them in certain ways. So I thought, what would an innovator, how could an innovator expand the business model canvas to incorporate some of the, things that they should be thinking about? All right. And so it's not, I wouldn't call it a finished tool or a finished product yet. It's the beginnings of something that may deserve more time and attention to work on.
Okay.
And basically, there's four parts of the business model of the social model canvas built on top of the business model canvas. And one is, think about the trajectory of your new innovation. What is it going to look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Okay, how is it going to evolve over time? Think about how your customers are going to use the innovation in ways that you don't expect. All right.
Mhm.
Think about how others are going to appropriate your idea and use it for different types of things. In other words, people will look at what you introduce and they'll copy it. I mean, the classic case is Facebook copying Snapchat. And then look at the externalities, the reputation, societal reputation, and policy implications, not just immediately, but 5, 10 years from now. So the objective of the social model canvas is to get the innovator thinking beyond the near term, thinking longer term, and thinking along 4 different dimensions in terms of how things could play out over time, both positively and potentially negatively. And by doing that, to actually gain insight and reveal some of the possibilities that you may want to pay attention to now and work to mitigate now.
So I'm showing the canvas here on our screen now, and I think these are the 4 dimensions you refer to: the appropriation, the evolution, the alternate use, and the reputation and
Vision
policy.
and policy, yes,
Yeah.
right.
And
And those are,
go ahead.
yeah, those are meant to be directional. So, these are 4 areas that I think are good to start looking at. And then the question is, well, how do you do that? How do you actually look into the future and use foresight and insight in order to see what may happen, and then what do you do about it? All right. So,
That's a great point. So kind of as a segue into that point, then, you assert that innovators really have to become futurists and strategists. So tell us what you mean by that and why that is important to be like a futurist and a strategist.
yeah. Well, the functions of strategy within large corporations are very muddled, in my opinion, today. A lot of times when you say strategy in a large corporation, they immediately think of the yearly strat plan, right? And, all right, in preparing the strat plan and what are we going to do for this year, and that's not what I mean by strategy. What I mean by strategy in this case is definitely the long-term positioning and role of the company within its ecosystem and within society. All right. So I think that innovators need to think strategically in terms of how their innovation is going to contribute to a purpose-driven strategy, for say, all right, a mission that the company has in order to, do something that is of benefit to society. So the strategy part gets at this whole issue of how do you become a purpose-driven company in some ways. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of company missions and stuff, and a lot of them are, very positive and doing good for our customers and adding value and things like that. But a lot of them also have and make a lot of money, right? So it's and grow by X% over a year, which really is not a strategy. That's an outcome. So I think innovators can have a lot to contribute to strategy and to learn from strategy tools and methods and things like that. Okay?
But it sounds like what you really want our innovators to do is to get to the point where we're really thinking very strategically about our innovations and how does this help the organization achieve its purpose strategically, and more than that, as we look into the future, how's that going to evolve, and how's that going to impact the strategy, the organization?
Right.
Is that right?
Exactly. And that gets at the futurist part of it, because the what we're seeing more and more is companies wanting to understand the future, okay, as much as you can. And it turns out that the whole futuring technology, if you will, the futuring world has evolved tremendously over the last few years, and there's tools and techniques for developing plausible futures that are very enlightening and stuff. And so my belief is that innovators need to be aware of these tools and to use them in their practice, okay, in order to see where the future could go, right? Not that it will go, not that you're predicting, but where it could go. And then you can use that as insight into how you behave today.
Certainly, there's a lot of tools out there for horizon scanning and environmental scanning,
Yeah.
Trend watching and trend analysis, and then forecasting. And then from that, we tend to start building scenarios of the future,
Yeah.
the broader realm of possible scenarios and the narrower realm of plausible scenarios. So, that's sort of a segue then. You talk about that in the chapter about anticipating the plausible futures and the scenarios. So let me put you on the hot seat a little bit and ask, how do you think the future is going to unfold? What do you think corporations, particularly large corporations, are going to look like 10 years from now?
Yeah. Well, that is a big question. And as a matter of fact, we've asked many corporations about what they think they're going to look like. And the answer is probably very different than they look right now. I mean, the whole pandemic has really upended corporations thinking about how they organize themselves and where people work and how they contribute and things like that. So leaving that aside, in terms of the purpose-driven part, I just think the trends that you're seeing right now are just an inevitable force that 10 years from now, you're going to see companies have the purpose behind their how they behave in the world and the artifacts that they introduce into the world up front and center, and have those discussed up front, and work actually to make sure that the social fabric, the social network that is now commenting on virtually everything that a company does, have that work to their advantage. Not nefariously, but to actually be an honest arbiter of what the company is doing and how it's behaving in the world, right? So I think that some of the tools we can introduce now to help innovators do that will be greatly beneficial 10 years from now, as companies, before they introduce something, saying, okay, what are the long-term effects of this? Okay, how can we use this to be more purpose-driven, this new innovation to be more purpose-driven and to drive profits?
Yeah, excellent. And I think you're right. And I think, the other thing I see happening that kind of aligns with that is, in effect, things are changing faster and faster and faster. Therefore, it's almost like the future is coming at us faster. And so
Absolutely.
a lot of these trends are being accelerated exponentially. And I get the sense that, you know, what we're seeing today is really the tip of the iceberg in terms of corporate accountability and transparency.
Right.
And I think that's just going to become incredibly amplified in the future. And organizations who aren't tuned into this today probably won't even be here 10 years from now.
That's correct. That's correct. And if they are here for 10 years from now, then you're going to have government regulations controlling what they do, right?
Yeah.
In very restrictive ways, right?
And it'll be interesting to see if how the balance between corporations and society and governments play out over the next 10 years as well. Indeed.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes.
Well, I want to thank you very much, Larry, for spending time with us today and talking about your contribution. We really very much appreciate that. And for all of our listeners in the audience, I would encourage you to pick up a copy of the book, The Other Side of Growth, An Innovator's Responsibilities in an Emerging World. You can find it on Amazon or on the GINI website at gini.org in the Innovation Library. Thank you very much and have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony. Take care. Bye.